Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Tell you a little bit about Brien Foerster. He is the author of 8 books. He's had multiple appearances on Ancient Aliens. He has recently been exploring Egypt, Peru, Bolivia, and Baalbek in Lebanon. And Brien is joining me here today to share some of his findings and some of his theories on some of these amazing structures that were built by man, we think. Anyway, welcome to the show, Brien. How's that mic doing?
Hopefully it's pretty good.
Great. You sound great, Brien. Not bad. Not bad at all. Welcome back to the show. It's been quite a while since we've had you on. How have you been, Brien?
Very well, thank you. How about you?
Very good, very good. As a matter of fact, I think this is your first show with us on Revolution Radio here.
I believe so.
Yeah. And so, Brien, tell us. Gee, I don't even know where to start. Of course, I follow you on Facebook and on YouTube. You've been posting some really great stuff, finding a lot of very interesting, how shall we call them, questionable architectural findings. You said you've recently been to Egypt and actually Baalbek and Lebanon, and I think that's a site that a lot of people might not be aware of. Can you tell us a little bit about what Baalbek is? Sure.
Baalbek is supposed to be, according to conventional academia, a Roman site. It's in Lebanon, which is a very small, beautiful country, and it's inland from Beirut by about 2.5 hours in the middle of a massive agricultural valley called Baka.
Very interesting. And what is there? Is there ruins? Is there pyramids? What have you found there?
It's quite a massive structure, stone structure made out of limestone. You can see clear evidence that the Romans were there at one time. But what's most intriguing is the quarry for the stone is nearby, and the foundation, some of the structures include stones that weigh 80 tons, 100 tons, 400 tons, and even 1,200 tons.
Oh my goodness! A 1,200-ton, a massive stone?
Yeah, there are actually 3 in a row at the Baalbek site. And it's as important to visit the quarry, which is a mile away, because there are 2 stones still in situ, each weighing estimated about 1,200 tons apiece.
Wow! And so, are you theorizing that they cut these stones out and literally moved them to the site?
Well, someone did, but I definitely don't think it was the Romans. It's like in Egypt and Peru and Bolivia, we see obvious evidence of stone construction made by famous cultures, such as the Dynastic Egyptians, the Inca, etc. But they were clearly building on top of structures and sites that are thousands of years older. And the only way that the huge megalithic work could have been done would be some form of ancient lost high technology.
Unbelievable. That's really amazing. I can't believe 1,200 tons. Do we even have the machinations to move something like that with our modern technology?
I don't believe so. We have, there are massive cranes that can move probably a stone of hundreds of tons, but when you get to this scale, and taking into account that the landscape is not perfectly flat, the theory that the Romans were chipping these things out and then having huge teams of slaves drag them across the ground on tree trunks to their final location is completely ludicrous.
Yeah, it does sound it, doesn't it? Now, you went to Baalbek. Was that the tour with the Comet School?
Exactly. It was an extension after our major tour of, the more profound, actually all the profound sites in Egypt itself.
Yeah, I was actually I was following you guys while you were there. I was wishing I was there with you. What a wonderful tour and such great people you had with you, Stephen Mailer and Patricia Awan and so many others. Tell us a little bit about the sites that you went to during this recent tour. Where did you guys go?
Well, we went to all the most famous sites, as in Karnak, and of course the Giza Plateau area. We were very fortunate in that we were able to enter all three of the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau, which is almost uncalled for. And that was incredible because the interior of each of the three pyramids is very distinctive and different. They were each created as individual structures, and the level of technology involved is jaw-dropping.
Now, tell me if this is correct. It is my understanding that there's really not much ornate design or anything in the interior of these pyramids. Is there any hieroglyphs or anything, or are they fairly just massive stones?
Well, the amazing thing is that there's absolutely zero in terms of hieroglyphics in any of the three of them. And when you go to any other, truly dynastic Egyptian site, as in built from 3000 BC up until maybe 100 BC, you see that everything, the columns, the walls, the ceiling, are either painted or sculpted or a combination of both. And why the greatest achievements of the ancient world would not have had ornate inscriptions inside them is the obvious clue that we're not looking at something that the Egyptians themselves built, but in fact inherited.
Yeah, that has been my feeling on this as well. I believe the last time that you were on the show with me, I think you were getting ready to go to Egypt for maybe your first time, or getting ready to go for in the first time in a long time. But your I guess your expertise, for lack of a better term, is more in the structures of Peru and South America. What did you think in comparison of the two ancient civilization? What are the parallels, perhaps, in architecture that you saw, or maybe some of the questionable aspects of the way they built them?
Well, what we see in Peru and Bolivia and Egypt and Lebanon now are that, again, the conventional story of history is being shown to be not true. We see achievements, especially foundation work, which is, at least 21st century in terms of capability, and yet this work is said to have been done 500, 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 years ago. So the reason why I was invited was Stephen Mailer, knowing that I explore Peru and Bolivia extensively, and even on my first trip, I was able to see that there were works in stone that the Inca could not have done, but built on top of or on the side of. He invited me to look at the same phenomenon in Egypt, and automatically within 20 minutes on the Giza Plateau, I was seeing obvious examples of where high technological equipment was used in the very distant past to cut super hard stone.
So, what your feeling is that perhaps the ancient Egyptians and the ancient, I guess for lack of a better term, the Peruvians or the pre-Incan civilizations were using the same type of building technology, perhaps, and these newer civilizations kind of just added to it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the work in Peru and Bolivia was done by the same people as Egypt, but what's common to both regions is the fact that you see works that would be very difficult for us to do today with our technology, and yet clearly they're there. And then on top, we can see the obvious work that, say, the Inca did, or what the Egyptians were capable of, because both in general, in terms of their timelines, the Inca and the Dynastic Egyptians only had bronze tools to work with, and they were sculpting stone that was much, much harder. And the great thing is that we tend to have engineers and stonemasons and people involved in modern day construction come with us, and nobody's been able to say, oh yeah, I can understand how the Inca did that, or I can understand how the Dynastic Egyptians did that work. They clearly see a distinction between what is possible of a Bronze Age level of technology and what is almost impossible in terms of modern technology.
And can you give us an example of that? What did you see in Egypt that made you question their ability to do something in a Bronze Age, using Bronze Age tools? Give us an example. Were there cut lines or no cut lines? Were there, laser lines? I mean,
well, actually, the technology in Egypt is more obvious than in Peru, because in Egypt we see ancient saw marks in stones such as basalt. And by seeing the actual saw marks, it's one who's put a piece of wood through a table saw. You can see where the saw has been rotating and cutting. So we've been able to estimate that whoever was living in Egypt at the time and building things such as, for example, the Great Pyramid, they had saws that were 20 feet in diameter, approximately 3/16 of an inch thick. And the cutting rate was, they were able to cut through about 2 millimeters of stone every rotation. And that is way beyond the capability of 21st century technology.
Oh my goodness. Has there been any exploration into what material was used to create the saw blade?
Well, we honestly, we don't have metals that could do that. The best saws we have, of course, are super hardened steel, maybe with cobalt added into it, and then diamonds encrusted on the surface, and then you use water as a lubricant. But the feed rate, as in the ability of these stones, and we also find drill holes, the feed rate seems to be about 500 times as efficient as modern day tools.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing about diamond. I can't imagine a 20-foot diameter diamond blade, but who knows? Who knows? So we definitely don't have the ability to do that now. In reference to bringing it back to Peru, have you seen similar types of questionable architectural tools that were used by them? What are some of the examples that you're seeing in Peru that reflect or give you questionable ideas of what tools they're using?
Well, actually, Peru and to some degree, one site in Bolivia called Pumapunku, Tiwanaku are more obscure because we don't see evidence of tool marks. What we do see is we see massive polygonal walls where every single stone was individually shaped in a polygonal fashion, not cubes, but 5 sides, 6 sides, 10 sides, 15 sides, and they interlock with each other. So whenever we have a stonemason that looks at one of these great walls in the area of Cusco, they simply can't understand how or why somebody would build using that technique. And some of the stones are up to about 120 tons.
Unbelievable. Wow. So they would have to literally turn these stones over to create that plane or that angle, I guess, that side. You said some of them were 10-sided.
Yeah, there's actually the most profound one, which people who visit Machu Picchu never see because tour guides don't show them, is there's one which three-dimensionally locks into other stones, and it has 32 sides.
Oh, my goodness. Now, you said you bring masons and other people that work with these type of things. Has anyone explored this mathematically? Is there any mathematical meaning or symbology behind this?
There could be. The amazing thing is that these polygonal structures are very organic in what they look like, and the the stones never fit straight in. Like, it wasn't like they were pushing the stones in to interlock them. There are no 90-degree angles of the joints, so they all bend and curve. And the next stone that moves in to fit into place has to have the opposite counter curve. So it's the best way to visualize it is if you had on your kitchen table, you took a bag full of marshmallows and you squished them together. They all achieve their own shape, and that's it. That is exactly what these walls look like.
Wow, that's weird. That's very strange. So they would literally have to reshape the next stone according with the stone that was previously placed.
Exactly.
Wow. Talk about custom made. Unbelievable. Now, Brien, tell us a little bit about what you're exploring right now. I've been following you on Facebook, but what has captured your attention right now? What are you looking into and going deeper as far as trying to come up with some type of understanding of?
Well, actually, what we're doing now is I'm working with different teams of experts. We're exploring, for example, the very strange structure in the highlands of Bolivia, located more than 13,000 feet in elevation, called Pumapunku. We're analyzing stone which has come from that site in order to do what is called cosmogenic testing. And that is the amount of time that the stone surface has been exposed to cosmic radiation, or in fact, how long has that stone surface been on the surface and had sun, strike it.
Right.
That's one we're doing. Unfortunately, the first two laboratories that have analyzed it, the first one basically refused to study it when they found out where the stone came from, and the second one did the timeline analysis, and they wrote back and said, we will refund your money and we will not tell you what the results are.
Oh my gosh. Very interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So again, we're looking at, and this seems to be a constant theme going on here, where mainstream empirical science just wants to hold on to what they got, don't they?
Yeah, they do. It's amazing that we've already contacted a third laboratory for that, and we're going to be more discreet in terms of presentation to them, so that they don't have a red flag come up, because it's simply a scientific test we want. But unfortunately, the standard historical picture is still ingrained in the psyche of too many academics who don't want to let go of their outdated idea of the history of humanity, but they honestly have no choice, because we have to know who we are, where we come from, and how extensive our history as a human population is.
Absolutely, and to think that some, let's say, just for example, this laboratory, if they were to make a discovery like that, I think that would be something to be proud of. To say, look what we've discovered. Brien Foerster brought us this rock, but we are the ones who dated it. This is great, but to have such fear to go against the quote unquote grain, it's amazing how, like you said, they're so ingrained and so stuck into their timeline.
Yeah, and of course, the only technology that's been used, for far too long is carbon-14 testing, and you can't carbon-14 test stone because carbon-14 is only for organic material. So this and other new technologies are what we want to use in order to be able to get a scientific understanding. And with the results, if the results prove, for example, that Pumapunku is 10,000 years old rather than 2,000 years old, it opens up history so that we can understand that we are a very sophisticated species that dates back far longer than we've been told, in terms of being, the common belief is that civilization rose 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and before that we were basically people living in little villages or hunter-gatherers. And the stone is just by the nature of all these finds that we have, the stone is telling us that our history is far more complex than what we've been conventionally told.
And Brien, I not to switch gears too much here, but I remember before the last time you had us, we had you on the show. You were working with I forgot the gentleman's name, but you were still doing research on the elongated skulls. And I don't know if I missed it, but I wanted to know what the results were of all that research that you guys had done.
Well, it's actually ongoing. We had initial DNA testing done of three elongated skulls, but unfortunately we didn't have the proper funding, and the people doing the DNA testing decided to themselves. A group of different interested parties. We do have the funding to do very advanced DNA testing. We are working with the Peruvian government on this, with one of their lead archaeologists, and we have the laboratory already set up, ready to do the testing. And so it's a process that's been going on for several months, but step by step we're moving closer and closer to do a truly scientific government rubber-stamped analysis of some of the elongated skulls of Peru.
And what region are you finding these in, Brien?
Well, I actually just finished writing a book called The Elongated Skulls of Peru and Bolivia, The Path of Viracocha, and I've been looking at where the skulls have been located geographically and also in terms of timeline. So I've been able to develop quite a convincing picture of where and when these various people lived. The most intriguing ones are called the Paracas people, and they lived up until 2,000 years ago, exactly where I'm sitting right now, on the coast of Peru.
Oh, wow. And was this well, I guess you haven't really come up with any final answers, but is your feeling that these were a race of people, or was this a tribe of people that molded the skulls, or was it a birth defect? What do we see? Is it man-made, or is it both genetic?
Well, to a great extent, most of the elongated skulls of Peru and Bolivia were the result of cranial deformation or head binding that was done as a cultural practice. But the older skulls seem to either be or have been influenced by people who actually were born with elongated skulls. And they also had auburn red hair, which is not a Native American characteristic, and a number of other very strange characteristics of the skulls, which would make me feel that they didn't cross the Bering Land Bridge and travel down the Americas to settle on the coast of Peru. I think they came from another part of the world.
Oh, that's very interesting. Have we found any similar type skull shapes in other parts of the world besides in Latin America?
Yeah, they've actually been found on every continent except Antarctica. And the most common timeline is 2,000 years ago. In almost every case, if not every case, it was only the elite that had the elongated skulls, and that's definitely the case in Peru.
All right, Brien, we're going to be taking a short break, and when we return, we're going to continue our discussion with Brien Foerster. We'll be right back.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are having a great discussion today with Brien Foerster, who's joining us live from Peru. Brien, where are you? Are you in Lima?
No, I'm in Paracas, which is 4 hours south of Lima.
Oh, okay. And what have you been doing to stay busy there? Are you still working with the History Museum?
Yeah, I'm doing that. We actually started a tour in about a week, and my wife and I are having a house built, so
Oh,
So if
that'll
you
keep
hear
you
a bang,
busy.
yeah, if you hear a banging sound, that's somebody upstairs.
Okay, okay. Well, you're definitely keeping busy then. Tell us a little bit about the tour that you're going to be doing coming up.
Well, it's actually the first tour that we're doing dedicated to the elongated skulls. And so we start on May 4th in Lima and then drive down here to Caracas, then go to Nazca, and we fly over the Nazca lines and then back up to Lima. Then we fly to Cusco and we see all of the megalithic sites in and around Cusco, including Machu Picchu. Then we drive to Lake Titicaca and see the sites there, and end up at Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and finally fly out of La Paz, and that's the end of this tour.
Oh, wow. So you're hitting all the major sites. That sounds wonderful. It should be a great
Yeah,
primer for people getting started on this journey of exploration.
yeah, it's great because I learn often. I learn as much from the guests as they learn from me, because we get people, of different life experience, and then we have another one in June as well with Hugh Newman and Andrew Collins. And then another one in October where we're going to be exploring with Jim Allen, whose theory is that there was an Atlantean city in the highlands of Bolivia, and then on it goes from there.
Wonderful. As a matter of fact, it's funny you brought him up. I was just looking at his theory of that. I found that to be very interesting. That if it's placed there, and I love that you said an Atlantean civilization, because it looks like there's probably more than one.
Well, there are honestly too many theories about where a quote unquote Atlantis could have been, from Quebec in Canada to Antarctica, etc. But because he was a cartographer with the British Air Force, he's been able to compare the map of not the continent but the city of Atlantis and surroundings, and compare that with the Altiplano area of Bolivia, and he's found an amazing match.
Yes, actually, he has. I believe. Now that I'm thinking about it, I believe I saw a documentary about him and his findings there. I believe it should be on YouTube somewhere. I don't remember the name of it, but does that sound like that could have been him?
Yeah, if you simply go to YouTube and type in Atlantis in the Andes, then there will be at least one video about him. And also, if you put into a search engine Atlantis in the Andes, you'll find his website and others relating to his thoughts on the subject.
Very interesting. And speaking of your tour and the places that you're going to, the Nazca lines I've always found very, very fascinating. And we have yet to. Has mainstream science come up with a definition of what they are? What were they doing there? And have we figured it out yet?
I believe so. I recently wrote a book about Nazca just because I wanted to cover all of the different theories and the oral tradition, and local knowledge about it. And it's quite a complex story, but to briefly state it, the Nazca system begins here in Paracas, and then the whole system of lines and geoglyphs go in a southeasterly direction through Nazca. So you're covering a distance of more than 200 kilometers in more or less a straight line, and there are at least 1,000 geoglyphs and lines involved in it. The Paracas elongated skull culture started the process of the lines and geoglyphs, and the Nazca people were the ones who finished it, or at least actually the Nazca died out because of climate change about 600 AD. So theirs were the last creations, but it's a very complex story covering more than 1,000 years. So they were made. Some of them were made for religious, spiritual purposes. It's a question of different function over the course of 1,000 years, at least.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I couldn't help but feel, there's been so many theories. Oh, they were created as a landing strip for UFOs or whatnot. But for me, I guess I felt the spiritual aspect that perhaps they were trying to create some kind of decoration on the ground in honor of, their belief in star people or whatnot. Is that any part of it? Am I anywhere close to that?
Well, it is possible. One of the most famous of the geoglyphs or figures is called the astronaut, and it's the only one in Nazca which is on the side of a mountain. The other ones are flat on the Nazca plain, but the astronaut, who has a very looking head, has one hand up in the air, and you can only he or she seems to be waving to someone in the sky. That was created by the Paracas culture more than 2,000 years ago. But again, it's such a complex story. Some of the figures, like the spider, for example, or the hummingbird, they were probably ritual pathways that you entered into the figure, because each one has an opening. It's like almost like a doorway, and no exit. The exit and the entrance are the same thing. So perhaps if you were taking San Pedro cactus or ayahuasca or something, this would be a ritual pathway that you would travel around a circuit and then back out again.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Kind of like I guess like a labyrinth of sorts.
Exactly.
Wow, that's wonderful. Now, I'm curious now, on the tour, are people allowed to walk the lines, or you have to stay away from them?
No, it's strictly forbidden to even walk over the fence. But that's why we fly. What you do is you get in a small commercial plane and you fly over the lines. That takes about half an hour to 45 minutes, and you see all of the major ones. But as an addition, you can also fly over what are called the palpa figures, and they are, in general, the runways, so-called runways, right on the tops of mountains. And it's the palpa area is actually more intriguing than Nazca itself, and very, very much unknown to the general public.
Yes, I believe this is the first time I've heard about it. I feel like perhaps I may have seen a photograph, but you say they look like runways on top of mountains. How long ago were they built, or do we not know that yet?
They were built at least 1,500 years ago. Again, the Nazca, the so-called Nazca lines and figures are on what is called the Nazca Plain. It's very flat and covers several hundred square miles. But when you travel north, all of a sudden you reach this area where you have these small mountains rising, and the tops are completely flat, like mesas or buttes. And it's right on top of those that you have geometric figures and triangle shapes. And
oh, we lost you there for a second, but I believe you're back. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. We lost the last half of that sentence.
Okay. Well, the palpa figures are on the tops of flat mountains, and that's why they're more intriguing, because the Nazca figures you see on this massive plain.
Wow, very interesting. And I can't help but notice, with all this wonderful knowledge that you have of these very interesting figures, places, and locations, why they would choose you to be on Ancient Aliens. And you were on, what, a couple of weeks ago, I believe? What is it, season 5 now, or?
Actually, I was recorded for season 8.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, they're actually. I've had a lot of fun with being on that show. I don't, of course, believe in all that they talk about, but it's they're attempting to turn a little more scientific now than they have in the past, and so it's at least it's a way to introduce subject matter to people. I wouldn't take all that they say 100%, but many people will not have heard of some of these ancient mysteries unless they watched a popular television show like Ancient Aliens.
Absolutely. And if anything, it helps people question, this so-called timeline that we're being presented.
Exactly.
Anything to make people question is good in my book.
Yeah, mine too.
What areas did you guys cover when they were filming you?
Oh, actually, I was filmed in New York when
okay.
we were on our way back from Egypt, and the two subjects were the ancient Inca road system, which was 25,000 kilometers in scale. So how did they do that? And the other one was actually, I'm really looking forward to this one, because it's facial reconstruction of the elongated skulls with the very brilliant three-dimensional computer artist Marcia K. Moore, who has been doing 3D representations of what she thinks these people looked like 2,000 plus years ago.
Oh my goodness, that should be very interesting. Have you been able to see a finished result yet, or are they saving that for the show?
Well, Marcy and I are in very close contact, and so whenever I find an anomalous-looking skull, I take as many photos as I can and send them to her. And when she has spare time, then she does a 3D mock-up of what this person she believes looks like.
Oh, okay. And actually, I think I've seen a few of those posted on your site and on your Facebook page. Very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
And it's very to me it's quite fascinating how technology is going to help us to solve a lot of these mysteries, even though perhaps they even had better technology back then. Who knows? Who knows? Brien, with someone who's just getting involved in these kind of sacred sites, listening to our show right now, what in your travels and your experience, what has been the greatest, how shall we say, the greatest mystery to you that you found so interesting and really shows that perhaps this timeline that we're speaking of is not right, that we have to question the timeline? What was the one that maybe had the most evidence to kind of like shake things up on the human timeline?
Well, it's kind of like trying to pick your favorite child.
Okay.
So I can't do it. But what I would basically say to people is, if you visit any of a number of amazing sites, and you leave with more questions than answers, then you will have a tendency to want to go back. So I've been to Egypt 3 times, but we are having a yearly trip. The next one is in April of 2016, because 3 times in Egypt is in no way enough. And I've only been to Baalbek once. I've been to Machu Picchu 38 times, but I still have questions about that place. And there is no one expert of any of this, so it's that's why it's the main function of the tours is to bring people in from around the world to look at these places, and for me to hear from their perspective what they think they're looking at. We've never had a single person be able to confidently look at any of this megalithic work and say, well, I can see how the Inca did that, or I can see how the dynastic Egyptians did that. They simply can't.
Yeah. And I wonder, and I'm curious, I would love to ask you this, is your first time seeing the Sphinx up close, what were your thoughts on the head of the Sphinx?
Well, the Sphinx is a lot smaller than I thought it was compared to the pyramids in the background, but it's painfully obvious that the head of the Sphinx or the face was recarved, because the body of the Sphinx is so incredibly eroded, and yet the facial features are still quite crisp, even though supposedly Napoleon shot the nose off or something. But and for most of the history of Egypt, the Sphinx has been buried up to its neck in sand. It's been uncovered by various dynastic pharaohs and in recent times. But because the weathering of the body is greater than the face, clearly the face has been recarved. And Dr. Robert Schoch, who's a geologist, as well as 200 other geologists around the world, can confidently claim that the Sphinx was probably originally carved at least 10,000 years ago. So it's old as the dynastic Egyptian civilization.
Wow. Wow. And when we say dynastic, how far back does dynastic Egypt go?
Conventional thought is dynastic Egypt started about 3100 BC, so about 5,000 years ago. And this, again, there are some really obvious problems with the conventional story, in that the Great Pyramid complex of 3 massive structures that would be almost impossible to make today were amongst the earliest works, and after that they kind of went downhill. And you see the same thing in Peru. Their very first construction in stone, called the Coricancha, would be very difficult to duplicate today. And yet, in succeeding hundreds of years, their workmanship again went downhill. So we can confidently state that Some of the structures in Egypt and some of the structures in Peru were not made by those famous cultures, but those famous cultures moved into the area, found them, revered them, and built things around, or maybe in some cases on top of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And as far as let's say in Latin America or Central America, what would be one structure? Is there a pyramid there that perhaps something was built around that you could give us an example for this side of the hemisphere?
Well, my wife and I, before we went to Egypt, we spent 6 days in Mexico, mainly around the ancient structures around Mexico City, specifically Toltec works, and some Aztec work. And though you can see that incredible human labor was involved in building them, there's nothing that we saw that would be difficult for a sophisticated and yet non-high-tech civilization to be able to do. However, we are planning a tour there in February, and we're going to cover much more of the territory, such as Maya and sites. Mexico is a fabulous country,
Yeah.
and we spent 6 days there, and I could have just been there for 6 months. It's wonderful people.
And lots of interesting architecture, I'm sure.
A lot. Mexico is a wonderful place. Guatemala as well. Honduras, I haven't been to, but Honduras has some Mayan locations as well. And there are other anomalies here and there, such as the strange stone spheres in Costa Rica, and a little bit here and there in South America. But as far as South America goes, the most mysterious things are in Peru and Bolivia.
Yeah. What about in Bolivia? What would be the one place you would be wanting to go back to the most?
There are two, actually. The one is, again, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, located 13,000 feet above sea level, right on Lake Titicaca, or very near Lake Titicaca. I've been there at least 15 times so far. And the other one we just went to recently, which is in the jungle of Bolivia, and it's called Samaipata. And it's very, very amazing. Just the journey there is incredible, because you get on a plane at La Paz, which again is 13,500 feet in elevation, and the plane goes down to 2,000 feet, right into the jungle, like pristine Bolivian jungle.
Oh, wow.
And then a car or a bus up through the jungle to an elevation of about 6,000 feet. And there you find Samaipata, which is the entire top of this mountain has been sculpted in the very distant past.
Really? Wow. And can we tell what the figure is that they've sculpted it, or?
It's a series. Yeah, there aren't too many human or animal figures. It's mainly sculpted surfaces, like recesses into the stone, about the size of a refrigerator, very enigmatic, crisscross lines on top, and the weathering is very extensive. So I would guess that Samaipata, again, is very ancient.
I wonder what they use that for, if they were for graves or for spiritual purposes, or...
Well, the Inca, we do find that the Inca, for some reason, decided to build a complex there. But I think, like a lot of the enigmatic places in Peru and Bolivia, and to some degree other countries, the Inca, when they would discover an ancient site like that, they would revere it, they would occupy it, they'd probably clear the area out of reverence, and then build their own constructions there as well.
Interesting. Well, Brien, we're running out of time already. I can't believe this hour went by so quickly. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you. But before you go, could you share with us? I don't know if you've ever come out with a theory, or if you want to share a little bit about our human timeline. What can you tell us? What can we look for?
Well, I think we're looking at very sophisticated technology existing at least 12,000 years ago. What we're now learning is that the end of the Ice Age was much more rapid than what we've been taught. So, basically we refer to these ancient civilizations as pre-cataclysm, or antediluvian. relating to the worldwide flood that happened 12,000 years ago. And so I actually urge people to look at my new website, which is a composite of everything I've been looking at, and that's hiddenhumanhistory.com.
Hiddenhumanhistory.com. I haven't seen that one yet. Very good.
Yeah, it's only about 6 months old, but it has a very powerful internal search engine. And so you can type in like Machu Picchu, and it'll give you articles I've written, photo sets, videos, etc. So it's I'm hoping that other researchers will start adding their work into it.
That's wonderful, and I want to thank you for continuing this work. It's very important that we do understand our history and that we break out of the confines of this modern idea that we're only here 5,000 years. So thank you for that. And, of course, you can find more about Brien on Hidden Inca Tours as well. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you very, very much, Brien, and it was a pleasure to talk to you as usual. Thank you.